Alright, welcome to part 3. Hopefully we can get this done in under 30 minutes. If you watched part 2, you saw we were just going over these first 12 points here. What are voices? What are the modes? What are plugins? What is latency? We talked about audio suite. Now I want to actually get in and hands-on. So let's talk about properly setting up our I/O. This is number 13. So first of all, what is I/O, right? I/O is inputs and outputs. So we need to make sure our inputs and our outputs are set up correctly. So we go to, big surprise, setup, I/O. And we look at our inputs and our outputs. And it should be the inputs and outputs that you have on your DAW. If you got an Apollo X8, it should have 8 inputs and 8 outputs. If you got a 16, it'll have 16. And if you have a twin or like a little PreSonus or a Scarlett or something, it's got 2, right? Now, a little tip here. If your buses get wonky, which they often do, just hit Command A and delete. It says, wait, you sure you want to do that? You have active buses going on. Yes, delete them. When we hit default, it brings in the proper buses that we need. It'll actually square away some of your input and output issues that I've experienced in the past. Note that your monitor left and right output is 1 and 2. Why is that? Because that output is an output. It's a physical output. It's your first and second physical output. And your monitor path is 1 and 2 essentially. That's why it goes straight to 3 and 4. Okay, I/O can get really cumbersome, and I probably shouldn't have started with that because I hope I didn't lose you already. If you're still with us, notice that all of a sudden the faders are grayed out. That's because when you make a change in your I/O, it often resets all your outputs or your inputs. And now it says no output. Look at that, no output is assigned. So remember, if you hold down the Alt key, it will apply anything you do globally. So now we're gonna click on our outputs, monitor outs, and all our faders and our pans come back, and our mutes and solos are back, and there's our monitor outputs. So that's your I/O. That's a really quick rundown of I/O, because I/O, you could do a whole 50-part series on freaking I/O. Number 14, create click track and set tempo. Now, when you got a guy in the room with you, or maybe you want to record guitar, why do we use a click track? Click track is so important because it's the way that we stay to the grid. It's so easy, even with a professionally trained musician, your tempo gets all over the place when you don't have a click track. Especially when you have other musicians playing together, you gotta use a click track, okay? So we're gonna create a click track by going over here to track. The track window at the bottom has a tab called Create Click Track. You'll notice there's no quick key. When you click it, it will be created underneath whichever track you had highlighted. And that goes for creating any new track. For instance, if I have the keys here, watch, let's make them all the same size, by the way. If I click Pad, and I click Shift Command N to create a new track, and I hit Enter, the new track will be created underneath Pad. That used to feel very arbitrary to me until I realized that's the way it is. And if you're over here, it will be created to the right of whatever track you have selected. Alright, so now we have a click track, and you'll notice that there's a plugin instantiated in the plugins list called Click2. Instantiated, if you recall, means there's a plugin attached to this track. If you click that plugin, this is where you can change the sound. If you have a diva of a musician that doesn't like, and they want something like a bell or a block or something weird, this is where you change the sound. You can even change the volume of the clicks too. But if you want to change like your meter or your tempo, you're going to come up here to Event. Now let's go to our tempo operations and tempo operations window. Here's an interesting point. At 10-4-2-3-4, this is very confusing because if I set my tempo here, at this point, the tempo change will happen in the middle of the song, which is why you'll notice it's one of the first things I tell you to do. Create the click track and set the tempo. That's the first thing you do when you open a new session, because you want your cursor to be at the beginning of the session. So I'm going to hit the return key a couple times and throw my cursor to the beginning of the session. Now when I go to Event, Tempo Operations, everything is at the beginning. That's what we want. And you're going to hit Enter to X out of that box. Now, if you're whistling a song or you're playing the guitar or a piano, and you don't know how to get the BPM, you're going to go to your app store and you're going to download this widget called Beat Tapper. Okay? When you open it, this is the whole widget. That's the whole program. To start tapping, you just click on it, and then I like to use my space bar, and I'm just going to start tapping out. Let's call it 85, all right, or 87, whatever. You're going to go back to Pro Tools, and then you can enter 87, or whatever it happened to be. And there you go. That's a nice little tip I got for you. If you're doing a song in like a 3/4 time signature, like a waltz, you might come up here to your event time operations window. And this is where you change the meter, 6/7, 3/4, whatever it may be. I recently had a client and she wanted the song to start at like 80 BPM and end at 120 BPM and go linearly, faster and faster. That's something you might want to do, so I'm going to show it to you. It's under here, Event, Tempo Operations, and you're going to go to Linear. These are the different types of tempos that you can have. Linear means it's just going to crawl from, say, what did I say? 80 to 120. And you're going to have to say when it ends. When do you want it to reach 120? This is where you do that. There are advanced settings there as well, but I digress. This up here is called your transport. Let's talk about pre-roll really quick because it's extremely important. You don't just want to tell your artist that you're working with, okay, go and hit record. Especially if they're punching in, they're going to want a little something called pre-roll. So to do that, I think I actually talked about it a little bit in the first chapter, but I just want to go over it again. You come down, Window, Transport, and this is where you add your pre-roll. Right there, you say how long you want the pre-roll to be. Type it in, I don't know, 4 seconds is my favorite. That's enough time to jump in on a song. Click where you want to start recording, record enable, and then hit record. Notice that I had exactly 4 seconds there. Did you see that? Before it started recording. To toggle that on and off is Command K. That will turn off pre-roll, and then Command K will turn it back on. Destructive versus non-destructive. I did mention that, I'll tell you again. Anything you do destructively is something that you cannot undo, like adding an audio suite effect to something cannot be undone. So that's destructive versus non-destructive. Smart tools and region features. We talked about the smart tools up here. The quick key for those is F7 and F8 on your keyboard. How to splice regions. There's 2 ways to do that if you want to cut and trim something. Right here I have this empty space. If you look closely, if I hit the E key on my keyboard, it takes up the whole screen. If you look closely at this dead space, there's something inside there. Let's say you don't want that. You can either highlight it and just hit delete, or you can highlight it and hit Command E to separate it, and then you can hit delete, or you can hit Command M to mute it, and you'll notice that it went gray. Watch, I'll do it on a larger waveform so you can see. It went gray. That's very handy if you're not sure if you want to delete something or not. Maybe you have a cool little intro guitar lick and you want to keep it, and you even want to see it so you don't forget about it, but you don't want to delete it. Command E or B to separate, and then Command M to mute. Very, very handy. That's a nice splicing trick. We talked about different types of fades. Loop and punch record. This is really cool. Let's say we want to record over this, but we want to do it a few different times, right? We want to just loop it. So let the Pro Tools record while we're playing the lick over and over until we get it right. You can select a region. Give yourself some room. You know, I like to select quite a bit. I go to my options and I have loop record. Now now it's enabled, loop record. Now I record enable the track. I hit record by hitting Command spacebar, and notice that it actually gave me some pre-roll there because I had pre-roll enabled. And now it's just going to loop over and over until I get it right. And once I get it right, I'm going to hit stop. If you don't want to do that, you can turn it off and you can do quick punch. So if you're engineering someone else, this is very handy. You can tell them, hey, let's redo this part. I'm going to punch you in right there. And if you're just working very fast, especially when you're working fast, just hit play. Okay, now let's let our pre-roll roll up on us. There he goes. And when you're ready to record, you can just hit Command spacebar and just punch in. And then hit spacebar to punch out. Pretty fancy. Strip silence and consolidation. This is something you're going to use all the time, especially with drums. There's a lot of extra noise in between stuff that you don't want that adds up and creates noise and mud in your track. So what you're going to do is you're going to highlight the region. Let's double click on the region, highlight the whole thing, zoom out a little bit. Don't forget, zoom in and out is command brackets. I've got this region here. Let's click on it and hit E to zoom in. And maybe this space here, there's some noise in the background we don't like, especially if it's a hypercardioid mic that picks up a really tight polar pattern on a tom-tom drum or a snare drum, and you're still getting some noise on the side, but it did a great job of isolating it. You want to get rid of that noise to clean your mix, especially on snare and kick drum, right? What you're going to do is you're going to highlight the region, you're going to go to Edit, and go down to Strip Silence. Command U is the quick key. What it's trying to do with all these lines is trying to find out what you're trying to get rid of. So you're going to grab your clip start pad and drag it until you get to the beginning of what you want to keep. Then you're going to grab your clip end pad and drag it to the end of what you want to keep. And everything in between, look at that, is ready to be deleted. You're going to strip it, bang, and it basically got rid of everything. Now if you have a song where you hit the kick pedal 500 times, this is extremely helpful. Now, what do we do about all these little pieces? Because now you have 100 different regions on this track. Well, we come over here to Edit and we click on Consolidate Clip. And look what happens. It renders it into a single region once again. Very, very, very handy. Something, if you're ever editing drums, that should be the first thing you learn. Strip silence and consolidating the region. Next up we have automation. Alright, now we're getting into some of my favorite stuff. Let's switch over to our mix window. Alright, we have 5 different types of automation. What we're going to do is we're going to click on Write to write automation. Notice it gets red. We are on Audio 5. Now if I hit play and I grab this fader and I move it up and down, it's going to remember what I did, and every time I hit play from then on, it will do exactly what I did. Ready? Watch this. Now that was very spastic. Let's go over to the other side and look and see what I did here. If we come over here to our track view selector, under the name of the track, it says we're looking at the waveform, but we can look at the volume and we can see the automation that I just wrote. To get rid of it, you can either undo with Command Z, or you can just highlight it and hit delete. You can also automate your mute and your pans. This is a stereo track, so I have the option to automate my left and my right. But with our mono tracks, you'll see it just says pan. Other options of automation are latch. As soon as you're done writing automation, it will automatically switch over to latch. That means it's not writing automation anymore until you grab the fader and do something. That's why I recommend clicking on it and going back to read. So it's just reading automation, and grabbing it does not write new automation. Another intuitive way to write automation is to come up here to our tools and click on the pencil tool. You can long click to get freehand or line. Forget the rest of this other stuff unless you want to get fancy. Freehand and line is really all you need to get creative. If you want to do a volume ride like that, that's what the fader will do. You can also click and automate your pans that way. So if you want something to slide in from the left and then go back to the right, that's where you would do it. You can automate really interesting creative panning effects. Note that once you write automation, and if you ever try to grab that fader again and just lower the volume, it'll spring back into the place that you wrote automation because you forced a volume position. So be careful about when you automate. Let's talk about master fader now. We're on number 23. 2 more and you have every piece of information you need to mix, track, record, and publish music. If we come over here to our master fader, you'll notice that I've already instantiated some of my favorite bus plugins. A master bus plugin is something that you put on the master fader. Your master fader is a global fader that everything runs to. When you bounce a track or print your whole song, when you bounce a song or print the whole song, everything will go through the master fader, and that's the wave file that you capture on a final bounce. Also notice these little red dots. That means I clipped my master fader. One of my favorite quick keys that I'm constantly hitting as I'm tracking and mixing is Option C or Alt C. That clears all of your clip indicator lights. You can also go into your preferences and set how long they stay on before they turn off automatically. These are my 3 favorite MasterBus plugins. Your Ultra Maximizer, is a hard limiter, almost like a brick wall limiter that you can set to be a little bit softer, but it keeps everything tamed so you're not clipping your master bus. Very important. ATR 102, if you've ever heard anybody talk about gluing a mix together, this plugin adds a fantastic glue to your mix by just making it polished and shiny, and it makes it sound like a finished record. Well, a little bit. I like to use the Stephen Smith mastering presets. I like the 30 IPs and the 15 IPs at 1 inch. I also like the half-inch 15 and 30s. Finally, the Shadow Hills mastering compressor. I've used these in real life extensively and they are absolutely fantastic. The presets are incredible. My favorite presets are the bus settings. Discrete iron and discrete nickel are the first two settings you should play with because they sound like they're not really doing anything, but they are just gluing the mix together. These settings are fantastic to note if you're ever using the real piece of outboard gear too, because that's really where this piece of gear shines in my humble opinion. Oh, now it's time to talk about buses and auxes. This may be the most complex thing I'm going to talk about, but it's also the first advanced thing any mix engineer does. And when you go to school for audio engineering, this is really where things get interesting and where you start to make a creative mix. Before we get into buses and auxes, it's important to know how to carve all the instruments out so you can start using your auxes. That's the thing I do right before I use my buses and my auxes. I carve out my instruments. To create separation in a song means be able to close your eyes and to pick out the drums and the guitar and the vocal in the center and a shaker off to your left. If you're really good, you can make it sound high and low, like up and down, as well as left and right. Panning left and right is a typical way to create separation. But to get the mud out of your separation, you want to EQ each instrument. For instance, if you have a snare drum that you hit, crack, it uses a very limited amount of frequency range. The human ear can hear 20 to 20,000 hertz. Within that frequency range that we hear, the snare drum has its own frequency range that it sits in. Just like a kick drum sits between about 80 and 300 hertz down low. But guess what? So does the bass guitar. It shares the same frequencies with some overlap as the kick drum. So how do you make the kick drum and the bass guitar sit in their own place? That's where it gets difficult. And the way we do that is we carve it out with EQ. You're gonna take your snare drum and you're gonna roll off all the bottom end, all that information, you don't need it. Just like you don't need all that really extreme high end on a snare drum. That's for our cymbals. And our cymbals don't need any mid-range or low end. We're gonna roll all that off with an EQ as well. And let me show you what that looks like really quickly. Here's a Fender Rhodes that I tracked. I don't need all that low rumble below 150 to 200 hertz. So I just grabbed it, I grabbed my low end, and I pulled it over here, and I cut it all off. And I took some of the high end, and I cut it all off. And I boosted the mid-range, because that's where our presence is. That's really the basics of EQ. I just kind of summed up EQ. That's everything you need to know. That's really the meat and potatoes of what an EQ is. You're carving every instrument out so it has its own place in your mix, and that's how you get rid of all the mud. Pretty cool, huh? Another way to get separation is to get a summing mixer. If you've ever heard of the D-Box, BAE makes them, everybody makes a summing mixer now. What it's doing is it's emulating analog, balanced, large format consoles where each instrument is on its own channel strip and it's creating this analog separation. When you're in the box, everything's just binary ones and zeros and it kind of gets lost because it's all just digital information just stacked on top of each other and you're not really getting true separation as you do in the analog world. That's a whole nother conversation though. Don't let me confuse you. Once you've carved everything out of the mix, you can start really playing with your mix. And to do that, I recommend using auxes. What is an aux? Well, it's a send. An aux send is a school bus, okay? It's where all the kids come to play. So when you have kick drum, snare, left overhead, right overhead, tom, hi-hat, those are all our children. We're gonna put them on a bus and we're gonna send them to school, our aux. So let's look at how we do that. Let's say we have these three keys in green right here. We want to send them to an aux that has an EQ and a compressor on it. We want to treat them the same way. We want to give them all the same treatment. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our aux here and you're going to label it like keys aux, right? Because maybe you'll have a vocal aux and a drum aux. Right now we're doing a keys aux. We put a cool compressor on it. Maybe we put a little EQ on it. And next thing you know, you've got a nice aux going, everything you want to treat your keys with. So now you come over here to your sends. This is where we send our keys on a bus, right, to school. We come down to bus, we select a bus, let's choose 1 and 2. And now this little window pops up. How much do you want to send? Well, we want to send all of it in this scenario. You hold the Alt key and click it and it sends it to 0. Now you come over here to this bus and you hold the Alt key and you drag it over to keys 2, hold the Alt key again and drag that bus over to keys 3, and every single one of them has the same level. You see? Now we have to tell our aux that the children are coming on bus 1 and 2. So we come over to the input of the aux and we select bus 1 and 2. The kids are arriving on bus 1 and 2. So here we go. Let's hit solo on all of these and hit play. Look, our aux is working. That's all 3 of the keys being sent to it and nothing else. Now, we have all these auxes going and I don't want to have to hit solo every single time on my aux. So I'm going to solo isolate this aux. So every time I solo my keys, the aux automatically solos. To do that, you simply hold the command key down and click on that solo button and it becomes grayed out. Now whenever I hit the solo on the tracks that are being sent to the aux, the aux will also solo with it and I can hear the aux, which is awesome. A quick tip about panning is your kick drum and your vocals are always in the middle, as is your bass. Everything else you play with panning left and right. Also, if you're starting out, I recommend using the LCR method, just hard left, center, and right. If you can get a good mix with LCR, you're going to have even more fun later by incrementally panning things, but it's good to start out with LCR method. That's a little trick. Lastly, our HW buffer size. What is that? Well, let's go to our setup and our playback engine. As I've told you before, your playback engine should be selected to your interface, whatever your interface is. Sometimes it likes to sit on Pro Tools aggregate. You don't want that. Sometimes it gets stuck on your built-in output, and if you have another external monitor hooked to your computer, it'll try to get stuck on HDMI. And every now and then my computer has done every single one of these, so make sure it is selected properly to the interface you are using. Now, I think I already mentioned this, but I'm going to mention it again. You use low sample buffer rates when you're tracking to decrease and minimize your latency. You use high buffer size when you're mixing because that allocates all the power you have to power all these plugins, because the computer is the one crunching all the algorithms of the plugins, because plugins are very taxing on your computer system. Another thing you can do is if you're using UAD plugins, you can buy a Universal Audio Satellite, which is basically just a CPU processor that takes over all that taxing work that the computer was doing to power all the UAD plugins. Waves has a version of their own as well, I believe. I don't have one. You can also increase your disk playback. I have 64 gigs of RAM on my computer, and it will allow me to go up to 60 gigs allocation of RAM power, that's processing power, to Pro Tools. Honestly, 32 gigs is all I need, and I can use pretty much as many plugins as I want. This is already a very long video. If you stuck with me this long, congratulations. You know quite a bit about Pro Tools. You can open a session, you can create tracks, enable them, record them, mix them, add plugins, do creative effects, you do creative audio suite stuff, you can mix it down, create separation, put stuff on your master fader, do MASTERBUS processing. And now let's talk about how to get that song into a little left and right stereo wave file. Ready? Option Command B. We are now bouncing our final mix out to give to the client or to have and hold till death do we part. So here it is. We're going to create a wave, MP3. It should default at your monitor output always. You do not want to print from anything else other than your monitor out. Always interleaved. You never really want multiple mono. Do you want a separate left wave file and a separate right wave file to pop up? No, we want an interleaved stereo left and right file. 16-bit, 44.1, that bit depth and sample rate was popularized and iconicized by the CD, the compact disc. That is the bit depth and sample rate of a CD, and it's now kind of the industry standard. You can mess around. I love 48K, it's very musical. 192 is extremely high res. 96 is also very high res, but it's a little digital sounding to me. I talk about this ad nauseum in my 3-part mixing tips series that I did in my YouTube channel. You can check that out if you like. 1644 is great. That's what most people use. This is where you label it, whatever you want. And then you come over here, you choose the directory, or it usually defaults in your bounce folder. I have recently selected to be bouncing these to my desktop because it's just quick, I can email them. It usually goes into your bounce folder. What is your bounce folder? Well, it automatically creates a bounced files folder. Obviously all your audio files are in there, your session backups are there, and your bounced files are in your bounce folder. When you bounce your final mix of your song, it usually ends up here. So now you know. Find the song. Here's one called Caught in a Trap. Look for the bounce files folder. There's not a lot going on here. It's very simple. And here are the bounces that I recently made. All right, and then offline, all this means is, do you want to listen to it from beginning to end as it's bouncing, or do you want it to just quickly and quietly process the bounce? I usually leave it offline. You hit bounce, it'll render across the screen, and it'll appear wherever you had it. And now you've made a song. You've made your first song in Pro Tools. Congratulations. I'm gonna call it. That's it. That's Pro Tools 101, 102, and 103. If you'd like to go into some advanced Pro Tools lessons, I'm happy to do it. We can start with 201. Leave it in the comments below. Thanks for watching. I love you guys. God bless. Treat people with kindness and respect. Pass it on. Each one teach one. All this information, it's out there for free. So please forward this video to some other audio engineers you know. Don't forget to like, subscribe, mash the buttons, click the bell in the corner so you're notified when I make these videos. And that's it. That's all I got for you. Take it easy, YouTube.